We are heading towards our fourth and last lecture of today, and I would call Professor Shankar, for Principal and Head Department of Philosophy, SIES College, Mumbai, for Pratap Seth Vedanta lecture. But in meanwhile, I would request Professor LP Singh, General President, 95th session of IPC, to felicitate her with a book written by our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajneesh Kumar Shukla ji, Bharatiya Gyan Parampara और विचारक. Thank you, sir. A big applause.
I feel great pleasure in presenting a book written by Acharya Rajneesh Kumar Shukla, Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi Antarrashtriya Vishwavidyalaya Wardha, to Maheswari. Maheswari is one of the most distinguished professor of philosophy, and she is also a principal of one of the most prestigious college of Mumbai. She is presenting a paper on the concept of sannyas. So sannyas has been misinterpreted by many scholars and thinkers. She is trying to give a real perspective, a Hindu perspective of the sannyas. Sannyas actually stands for the inner renunciation. Outer renunciation is not more important than inner renunciation. And it is one of the oldest traditions which is present almost in all religious traditions. You see, the founding father of the arithmetics, Pythagoras he lived a life of a sannyas, and in 6th century BC, he was one of the greatest men. He believed in Hindu philosophy, traditions of, say, transmigration of soul, also punarjanma. This has been practiced for the for 6 months. Not only for the first time that Buddha has introduced it, Shankaracharya has introduced it, but it is present from the very beginning in our civilization. So actually the Indian tradition is monastic and mystical, and it is against the hedonistic and the Faustian world view of the Western civilization. So she is trying to present the sannyas in the proper perspective. So I feel great pleasure in presenting this book to a great scholar and the principal.
Good evening, respected members on the dais, my mentor Dr. Paneer Selvan, Mr. LP Singh, and the other speakers for the day, and my dear colleagues and friends. Pratap Seth Vedanta Endowment Lecture, for which I am today going to talk about the attitude of renunciation among sannyasis. Dr. LP Singh, who was sitting next to me, was too eager to read my paper before I could even present it, and that is very nice of him, and could also give few highlights which I have not even put it in the paper to give you or to set the ball rolling for the topic. As Eckhart was beautifully said, that what we take or contemplate on, what meant by as contemplation, that we pour out in love, the work of a monk is not just to fill the belly, but God looks after it anyways, but for proclaiming the glory of God, unquote. So the concept of sannyasa predates every kind of religion in the world. It is universal in its spirit, not peculiar to Indian tradition alone. It contains some of the fundamental spiritual thoughts of humanity. It reflects the spiritual attitude as well as the spiritual life. According to Swami Krishnananda, who said that sannyasa is regarded as an external expression, a social form, we may say, of maturity of thought. The idea of renunciation actually, or a formal sannyasa that we talk about, when one desires to get out of the external distractions. Among them, few of them are called as mystics, few of them are called as yatis, or some of them are called as parivarjikas, some of them are called simply as monks and sages and sadhus. The sannyasa tradition, when you look at it, it promoted minimalistic living, it abhorred materialism and embraced spiritual percepts and engaged in an inner journey. Many could actually translate this age-old tradition along with spiritual awareness into a practice within social, religious communities. We have a lot of names that we could talk about, like Mr. Singh took about even from Pythagoras up to the recent tradition that we have seen both in Vedanta and the others. In India, Adi Shankara observed that the tradition of sannyasa had been dismantled during his time. As a logical thinker, a prolific writer, a phenomenal teacher, and also an extraordinary philosopher, he decided to bring some kind of an order with, in the society among even the householders and also the sannyasis. During this time, due to the socio-economic issues in the families and the society, moving into sannyasa tradition itself became a kind of an escapist route, and therefore from the family responsibilities, etc. So many could not sustain this path for long because they've chosen it that way, and it was something that they could not return back. Of course, and we also have quite a few of them who chose this path of it only by their own willingness, and therefore they embarked on this path of sannyasa, abided by the norms, and tread the path of self-inquiry and to service to God. Shankara, in order to systematize this completely, laid down the regulations, and therefore it was referred as Dashanami. Sannyasa ashrama fundamentally contain lot of do's and don'ts as yamas and niyamas. We are usually caught between all kinds of dualities. A sannyasi must be above that. The path of sannyasa is indeed very rigorous and onerous. According to Swami Niranjanananda Saraswati, he said that in a sannyasa darshana, that a sannyasi is believed not by the rituals, not by begetting children, not by the wealth, but by the renunciation alone, he can attain that freedom. So this implies that complete severance of all kinds of bond in terms of family, society, caste, creed, religion, polity, and all any other identity one has to sever from. In our tradition, it is a virtual rebirth, we call it. And therefore, one embarks into the path of sannyasa only when one is mentally and psychologically prepared for it. Usually, it is a path, as I said earlier, completely not looking back. The decision that one has to come, that comes from within, has to be with firm and with faith. It cannot be altered at all times. Different traditions have varied names to the people who have chosen renunciation in totality, like the Dravidians used to call them as the yatis, and some of them are called as ascetics or the bhikshus, while sannyasis have also been called simply as sant and sadhus. It is also believed that the state of renunciation has nothing to do with the status of birth, education, or any kind of learning, but only the willingness to give up the attachments. Ultimately, anyone with or without abhorring the ochre robe can be a sannyasi, provided he can give up all kind of desires and desire-promoted actions. As we are at Wardha, and we are amidst two important people who have brought in this entire place and brought so much of enrichment to this, both Gandhi and Vinoba Bhave hardly wore an ochre robe in terms of it, but the attitude of renunciation was so much within them that one could see in all their activities, in their service to God as well as in their social commitment. The deep rusted samskaras that we have, vasanas which are all deep-rooted, have to be completely obliterated, and thus the destiny which where one has to destroy all worldly attachments with people, places, and possessions. Stages of sannyasa. In the practice of renunciation, there are 3 stages to be considered. First, there is an outward renunciation, what we spoke about as the destroying of all the desires and attractions and obsessions which are all in front of us. And secondly, even renunciation as a matter of heart and mind rather than about the body. Then the second stage implies a renunciation of the worldly desires and absolutely having a removal of all kind of aversions. The dualities has to be completely emptied rather than of the world of objects without. And finally, the third stage is the ultimate renunciation, which means a renunciation of oneself in its entirety and the consequent destruction of all the ephemeral attractions. Traditionally speaking, there are 6 stages of sannyasa, like in the life of a sannyasin that we see, and these are referred as the Kuchuka, Bahuduk, Hamsa, Paramahamsa, Turyatma, and lastly we have the Avaduta. In all these names that we have seen it, we have got enough number of people in the history of India, and you can place them in this order, how they could actually relinquish a lot of things in order to feel that renunciation. Organized sannyasa. After Buddha, organizational sannyasa order as Sangha got formed. Earlier perhaps each remained independent as a mendicant or a sadhu moving from one house to another. Even the monasteries and the mutts were established or formed eventually. Though sannyasa existed prior to Shankara and Buddha, we find this organizational order only after they preached their philosophy. In Buddha's Sangha, women could also be included, but Shankara's disciples, direct disciples, there were no women at all. After a few centuries, social conditions necessitated the formation of a new type of sannyasa organization which we find today. Swami Shivananda, Vivekananda, Paramahamsa Yogananda, Chinmayananda, and so on, many of them you can include it today. Since the paucity of time, I am jumping to one para next. Women and sannyasa, ancient and modern. Sannyasa is an attitude. To renounce also is an attitude. So few who may wear the sannyasa robes and practice renunciation, while there are also few householders may lead a life of renunciation without a robe change, yet no less in the spiritual attitude. There is no gender perhaps here that we are talking about. Perhaps women never chose to leave the home in the pretext of renunciation, maybe due to there is no social sanction nor security guaranteed. Yet we do have few mystics who simply walked in search of their beloved deity, or at least in search of their truth. Karikal Ammayar, Meera, Laldid, Avadayakka, Anandamayima, Mata Amritanandamayi, Avayar, we have a host of them, just to name a few, even Avadayakka. In recent times, even Swami Jnanananda Saraswati of the Vishnu Mohan Foundation stood for this kind of epitome of supreme knowledge and love. The robe of sannyasi carries a lot of messages and calls and expectations. There have been many ordinary people, men and women, who have never adorned the ochre robes, but the spirit always remained with them as a true sannyasi. The journey, after all, begins from one formidable step, that is towards a self. One need not mix up enlightenment with a sannyasa. The role of a sannyasi. The name of Advaita Acharya of Madhusudan Saraswati, I'll just cut short the story as it is, as even the other speakers mentioned about Madhusudan Saraswati, who was actually the pioneer in bringing about some kind of a system in the Naga order as well as in the other order of sannyasi. When a lot of people were slaughtered and a lot of mishaps happened during his time, he directly went to Akbar and asked him that there is a need for him to intervene in this situation. Akbar consented, and immediately Madhusudan Saraswati was asked to take up that work instantly. In this feat, you will find that absolutely it is superhuman feat that he contributed, and people from all varnas were called and given them sannyas. And thousands of warrior-minded Hindus from all varnas were initiated into sannyasa. And then you find that this explicit purpose of protecting this ancient, timeless, and original dharma of this land. In other words, he broke the shackles of the caste and the ideas and so on. If a sannyasa is an attitude, and the commitment to lead a life of a very frugal life, it has got nothing to do with the varna system, and that's what we meant. When Madhusudan Saraswati returned from Agra and after meeting Akbar, the Naga Sannyasin organized a Mammoth conference at Varanasi, which supported this entire concept. A carefully buried fact of this history, the Naga Sadhus, they were the first armed defenders of the Varanasi and in general, and Prayag against the attacking of other invaders. This is the primary reason why even today, the Naga Sadhus occupy such an esteemed position, who have earned the reverence even till date during the Kumbh Mela, etc. Right? Responsibility of sannyasis. In general, we find the path of sannyasa involves, as it sounds in our early life, is like a life of deprivation. This is part of it. One feels renunciation means to lose everything that we love, having to deprive ourselves of what is pleasant and enjoyable. This is understandable, for this is really the only way the worldly mind can conceive of letting go something that what we like the most. For this, one has to really work for it and really struggle towards that aspect of self-inquiry. As a contemporary Indian thinker, Raymond Panikkar says that not everyone in this endeavor or inclination take up a kind of a vacation towards monasticism, but all of us have got some part of us in us, a sense of monk, and that should be cultivated, and after after some a satta considered the insight, seeing it clearly, which is the foundation of all practices. It gives us to explore very practical ways in which we can support and also actually put it into practice, the attitude of letting go. And that is so essential in the modern world today, we find it. So, abandoning of which is constantly hindering our life, hindering our peace, and also giving a lot of trouble to our mind, which is cluttered with all technological gadgets. What is essential most in the attitude of sannyasa is retention of the values that we have kept it, using those things which are minimalistic, even in terms of materialism, removing and also developing the concept of what is painful and what is not painful. I conclude here, jumping of course. Shankara, the greatest Advaitin and an impeccable sannyasi, talks about the virtues of renunciation in many of his writings. In his famous Sadhana Sopana Panchakam, he addresses two aspects of life: discovering the ultimate goal, the human birth, and the accomplishment of that goal. So he prescribes a series of disciplines to imbibe especially the 4 ashramas of life. While discussing the 4th stage of sannyasa, one becomes free from all psychological dependencies, one who renounces at the physical level, and he becomes only an external sannyasi, but one who renounces totally at the mental level, he says he becomes a true sannyasi. By following this path, one becomes absolutely a Jivan Mukta. All of us in general, and sannyasis in particular, are ever in search of freedom. Sannyasis as a group, we find they understand freedom and responsibility, which is the theme of the IPC, including solidarity, accountability, and service at large. They have merged as torchbearers in spreading spiritual awareness and in making responsible global citizens through their activities in the nook and corner of the world. It is unfortunate that we also find in the name of ochre robe many who have deprived from the spiritual path but have put themselves into polity and to community activities. The core essence lies in renunciation and renunciation alone. Solitude may not be available to all of us, but I hail those people, those pilgrims who have taken the path of renunciation and try to sanctify this world for peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for
time?
your lecture, and to respect the time constant also. And you have well explained us the tradition, virtues, stages, and need of renunciation, that is sannyasa. Now, this session is going to be completed